Alrighty, module two. Let's get it done. My three strongly held beliefs are that every human being deserves to be treated with a basic level of respect and decency until they've proven they no longer deserve it, and anything past that kind of has to be earned. Um, every single person has dealt with or is dealing with some sort of pain, and it should be our role as a collective species to do what we can in alleviating the pain of others. And finally, as long as you aren't intentionally doing harm to others or the environment, a person should pursue their happiness without fearing judgment. These beliefs and ideologies of mine stem from uh, various belief systems, religions, or practices, as well as my own personal experiences, such as the aspect of life being suffering, and that's not a pessimistic view. It's just simply part of what makes being alive. You know, happiness, sadness, anger. The good comes with the bad, and that idea stems from the Four Noble Truths of Zen Buddhism, which consist of the notion that life is suffering, and we do what we can to get past it, or help others get past it. With regards to my belief that pursuit of happiness is so important in life, finding what is going to bring you joy, it's paramount to existence. Why live if you're not happy with it? Um, One of my favorite philosophers and teachers is Alan Watts, and I'd like to share an excerpt from his lecture, "What if money was no object?" And he states, "When we finally get down to something which the individual says he really wants to do, I will say to him, 'You do that and forget the money.' Because if you say that getting the money is the most important thing, you will spend your life completely wasting your time." And that really resonated with me, because why would we chase something that doesn't make us happy only to continue chasing that over and over and again? For example, about 80% of US college students change their majors at least once during their career, and on average, they'll change their major at least 3 times during their education, and that comes from the National Center of Educational Statistics. We take a long time to find what makes us happy, what our bliss is, and we have to chase that when we can. Um, we get very bogged down by cultural expectations and norms, and once you start to realize that what you're doing isn't making you happy, you have to make that choice of switching and discovering what does. I would say the text would describe me as having a pretty good sense of the awareness imperative. I just by nature of being a sympathetic and empathetic person, and being a people-oriented listener, I generally have a very good understanding of myself, what makes me me, the good, the bad, everything in between, and by extension, I begin to see patterns and understand people in that way as well. Obviously, I don't know everything, and I'm never going to understand everything about myself, but I do what I can. Bringing us down to the next topic of what it means to be beautiful, successful, or attractive. Nailing down every single one of my cultures is very hard, so I think I'm going to stick to these adjectives defined in the eyes of the stereotypical American culture. Traditionally, the United States definitions of beauty are very, very rigid. We are expected to be in extremely good shape. We consider tall to be a metric of attractiveness, having clear skin, uniform or symmetrical features, and we also consider, ironically, features or aspects that are unique but not too unique, such as a skin discoloration or multiple colored eyes. I forget what the term is. Um, as for non-appearance based merits of attractiveness, it ranges from monetary value like money and property to intellectual achievements like high intelligence and creativity to even the power over others. Uh, the idea of success in the US over the past 70 years or so has been so heavily influenced by the model of the atomic family. You know, you go to college, you get married, you have the same job for 50 years, you retire, and then you die. And then that gets passed on and keeps going and going and going. And it really has kind of become the national standard in the United States. And it is also very heavily influenced and feeds into the values of our economic system. Um, I don't think that holding every person to this standard is realistic. Uh, a quote attributed most often to Albert Einstein, but has been discussed as not being something he actually said, is everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its whole life thinking it's stupid. We can't expect everybody to be the same because we're not. That's just not how the world works. We are not uniform. We're not cookie cutter. And our standards of physical beauty are most certainly not universally shared, although its influences has been pretty widespread to a lot of countries. When I was living in Peru, you would see billboards for makeup or uh, clothing or anything, and every time it was tall, very light-skinned people who were portrayed in these ads, and that's not very representative of the Peruvian culture, at least from a physical standpoint. And although U.S. standards of attractiveness are not necessarily universal, I would say that from what I've found, that the values of intelligence and power are pretty appreciated, at least from a genetic and instinct stance. The even though some cultures may underappreciate those in some of their members, such as in a patriarchal society. And the textbook explains these different cultural emphasis on standards of beauty, attractiveness, and success through the concepts of perception and selective exposure, attention, and retention. Processes of perception. So I truly believe that perception happens automatically. We unconsciously intake everything that goes around comes around us and is we are exposed to in our worlds. But we most certainly have the choice to on how we interpret and respond to these stimuli. Just this morning, my girlfriend commented to me that I should be careful with the way I clean my headphones because they could damage them. And you know, at first you would take that as someone telling you what to do and how to do it, but in reality, they're really just trying to be helpful. And I would say the text and the author and I see eye to eye on this topic. Having an awareness of both your culture and the cultures of others can allow you to expand and find alternative ways for interpreting these stimuli, which brings me to my next point of a time I misunderstanding a message. When people interact with their parents, they tend to regress to a mindset of the parent-child dynamic, and the severity of that depends on the relationship. But what comes to mind is not a specific time or situation, but for the longest time, my mother and I had a pretty strained relationship because of this. You know, growing up as a only child of a divorced mother, you get all the attention is sort of focused on you, so you're their baby. And because I'm a people-oriented listener, I paid more attention to what I felt was being said than or what I felt was being said than what was actually being spoken to me. And if I'd been more of a content-oriented listener, I might have understood that instead of being a nagging uh, parent, my mother was simply trying to help me. And I think if I hadn't been in that headspace of the child-parent dynamic, I probably would have seen it differently. Um, Demographic traits. This is going to be a long one because I have a lot to say. So the three that I decided to look upon on myself was that of me being a white Caucasian, being a male, and then being an actor. Um, we unfortunately live in a very ethnocentric society, and the U.S. white population sits around 73 to 76%, and Spokane, being the second largest city by population in Washington, sits at 86.7%, and Spokane County is around a whopping 90 or 89.2% white. Even Lewis and Clark, the high school that I graduated from, is the third most diverse high school in Spokane, and only has about 30% minority enrollment. Growing up in a culture greatly lacking ethnic diversity, I certainly did not have the kind of exposure it takes to become a well-rounded human being. And not having that broader understanding of other cultures, it most certainly allowed me to live life through rose-colored glasses. I didn't have to worry. I didn't fear uh, repercussions from authority or being picked out of a crowd because of the way I looked and the color of my skin. And being in the majority racially or ethnically, or not only ethnically, but also not majority, but having those demographics being so heavily presented in everyday life, not just the white culture, but the male culture. Even though women are about 51% of the population, their voice is so underheard because we are a patriarchal society. In this, like for example, in this 116th Congress, even though there have been record-breaking numbers of women becoming elected, they still only consist of 25% of the Senate and 23% of the House. Media is even dominated by men, with only 12% of the directors that worked on the top 100 grossing movie in 2019 were women. And when these two demographics that you belong to are the most heavily represented in your country, it's really hard to get a brand new viewpoint or see anything other than what you see in the mirror. And so growing up in a life so starved of diversity, I searched for it. I craved it, and I found it by traveling abroad to Peru, but also by choosing to reconnect with acting. The entire process of acting is that of human expression. Often the roles we are chosen to play are those that are unfamiliar. We then are forced to either learn and adapt the culture of the character or fail at playing the part convincingly. In the very first role I played during my college career, I was a white male who became intoxicated with power and used it to try and gain advantage over women. And this happened in 2017, so incredibly timely with the Me Too movement and what was going on in Hollywood. In the most recent role, the character I had to play was gay and couldn't be with the person they loved because of the societal pressures put upon them. So you begin to learn, or you are forced to see a perspective that you didn't necessarily understand, or you have to come to grips with your own. Interruptions in our culture, it's hard for me to discern whether or not which demographic interrupts more because I haven't necessarily paid attention to it. How and when is acceptable to interrupt is based on context. Some situations it's okay, some others it's not. And the text discusses learned behaviors being created by cultures. The context of culture determines mannerisms. So, some classrooms that's acceptable, some it's not. So, boy, I had to rush through that. thank you for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed.